Hello, I'm Mr. D, and welcome to Mr. D's Teaching Tips. Today, I want to talk about celebrating student victories. When I'm talking about celebrating student victories, I'm not talking about the long-term, year-long, or long-term goals that we have for students. I'm talking about the small victories, the small V victories along the way. We oftentimes point out students' failures or challenges or struggles or problems, and it's easy for us to see because they get in the way of our job, of our teaching. You have to recognize students' victories. This is especially important for those students that give us a challenge every day we see them. Celebrating those small victories goes a really long way. In my 10 years of teaching, I've seen numerous students who it has been a huge success to recognize their small V victories. So let's say you have a student who is a regular disruptor of your class while you're trying to teach. And you notice one day that they happen to not be disrupting your class so much. Yes, it tends to happen daily, but maybe this day you notice that they actually seem to make a bit of effort to not do it, or it just happens to be a day that stands out to you that they weren't doing it as much. This is the perfect opportunity for you to recognize the positivity that you've seen in that student. What I like to do is pull them aside outside of class and talk with them. So you might pull them outside of your class after you're done, or sometimes I even do it during the lesson, but you know how it is with instructional time. You don't want to be wasting much of it. So you might pull them outside of your class after you're done with your lesson, after you're done with your class, and they're moving on. You might say, hey, can I see you for a minute? And you say, boy, Johnny, I really see that you made an extra effort today to not disrupt my class. Or you were really doing a good job paying attention today, and I appreciate that you were less disruptive. Now, what I've noticed is initially, students, and when I say students, I'm speaking of the kindergarten through 8th grade students that I have worked with over my 10 years. Students will some of them might look at you a little weird. They might be like, what? Like, what are you saying right now? The initial shock will wear off. It's just that most of these students are not used to having their choices recognized, their positive choices recognized. They're so used to people battering them and disciplining them that they're shocked when someone actually recognizes a choice they've made that's positive. And in doing that, you will improve your classroom environment and you will improve your relationship with certain students, in particular those students that you find the most challenging. And the best part about this is it actually takes very little effort on your part. All you need to do is say something, is take an extra 30 seconds of time to say something and recognize a student's efforts. Now, it does not, I just gave the one example of a disruptive student, but it can happen in a bunch of different ways. It doesn't have to be the disruptive student. Maybe you just see someone who put in some extra work time on their assignment for the day, and you're like, wow, you were really focused on your work. Or, oh my goodness, I saw that you were really trying to pay attention to the lesson today and get something out of it. And I can tell that, you've really put your whole self into today's lesson. Recognize students' small V victories, the victories that happen along the way. You can absolutely recognize the big victories too, but celebrate those small ones along the way, and then they can serve as mile markers. So you're kind of marking the way as a student starts making gains. Oh, wow, you've reached this point. Oh, wow, you've reached this point. And sometimes it takes a lot of those small victories along the way before you get to a big victory. But in celebrating those small V victories, you're going to propel that student forward and help them to be successful, more successful in working towards a big V victory. And you will find your life as a teacher improves too, because instead of focusing on all of the negative, you're focusing on the good. You should probably even keep a log of the recognitions you make of student behaviors. This can help you track their improvements, and it also gives you an opportunity of something to pull out during meetings with other teachers or with the principal or with a parent, that you can show them specifically the things you've said or what you've recognized in that student. I guarantee you other teachers, the principal, and the parents will be impressed. And I would even go one step further and say, in addition to logging it, you might also think about calling the parents and saying something good about what their students did. Parents tend to be surprised when you do this. At least that's been my experience. I've done for the past few years, in fact, trying to call, fairly often with students that are making good choices in class, so that not only are they receiving calls for a poor choice and when you need their help as a parent to help discipline their kid or to hold them accountable along with you, but also to show them that their student, that you do care about their successes too along the way. Parents really appreciate that. I cannot tell you how much positivity I've received from parents for taking a moment, just 1 minute, and calling them and saying, I was really impressed by what I saw your student did today in class. Teachers should be known for calling about good things and not negative things. I think both are important phone calls to make, but I think we heavily lean towards the negative side. So we need to be that change to the entire education field. I once read or heard somewhere, and I can't remember where it was, or I'd give credit where credit's due, but I heard that there is a distinct difference between recognition and praise, and I agree with that. Praise is just your generic, good job or excellent work or whatever else that you typically are giving to students, but doesn't specify necessarily what the student has done to deserve that. It's just kind of given out, sometimes willy-nilly without a really good reason. Recognition is specifically taking one thing and saying, this is something I see that you're making improvements on. So make sure you are doing recognition and not praise, because praise is not going to be all that successful. It's okay to praise your students now and then, but it's not going to see the success rate that recognition does. Taking that extra time, that extra minute to specifically recognize something that a student has done. One last note with this. You absolutely need to celebrate students' small victories along the way, but do not think for a second that you should be celebrating a student that is not making good choices just to try and fluff them up. Kids are not stupid. They know immediately whether you're being genuine or not, and they know when you know that you're just, trying to play them, trying to get something out of them. You need to genuinely recognize an effort that's being made by the student. I think recognition, in my experience, I've taught 7th and 8th grade for about 4 years in my 10 years of teaching, and I think that recognition actually works better with middle school students than it does with elementary school students. I think it's useful for both, but I think the improvement rate with recognition goes a longer way at middle school. And it might be because these students tend to get less recognition, if I had to guess. They get a lot more negative and a lot less positive than some of the elementary school kids. I don't know that for certain, but I just have a feeling that tends to be the way it is. More of, oh, well, you're grown up, so we don't have to do this anymore, or whatever. And that is absolutely not true. Disciplining and recognition are linked to each other. Recognition is not discipline, but it's like on the opposite end of the spectrum. Instead of seeing and I guess you could call it recognizing, not really recognizing, seeing and pointing out student misbehaviors or things they're doing wrong. You are instead seeing and pointing out the good things specifically that the students are doing. And so both are valuable and important. I am not saying by any means neglect disciplining your students. I absolutely think you need to discipline your students for you to have a successful teaching experience. But your student relationships will improve dramatically if you recognize positive student choices. Celebrate the victory of each and every student you have in the classroom, the small V victories. It takes very little of your time. The students appreciate it. It builds your relationship and rapport with them. And in the long term, you're going to get a lot more effort, success, and approval from your students. And you will be a more successful teacher because of recognizing the small student victories.